Good morning. Welcome from my side and also in the name of Susanne Gensheimer, Christian Spies and Vivian Trommer. As cooperation between the Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Westfalen, the University of Cologne and the Goethe University in Frankfurt, we have prepared this conference together. From the very beginning, the museum and its collection have been subject to constant change, undergoing a multitude of reforms and transformations, like all institutions. However, it is precisely the presentation of the collections that has evoked notions of stability, including polemical associations such as symmetry or mausoleum. In recent years, the dynamics of collection and their power of display have increasingly coming into focus, not only in museums of modern and contemporary art. Collections are viewed as aggregated states that represent discourses, histories of relevance, constantly changing collection practices, and display histories. Here are some recent publications and conferences: Mobile Museum, Collections in Circulation, Museum Collections in Motion, or Reverse Collection History. They remind us of up-to-date keywords with regard to collections: mobility, circulation, motion, change. To frame these keywords, we have long enough been discussing the social life of things with Appadurai, or cultural mobility with Greenblatt, the dynamic nature of objects or things, and of museum collections, the variety of epistemic approaches, the need to revise existing categorization, the recognition of problematic exhibits that require sensitivity and re-evaluation, and so on. While the traditional distinction between the stable, permanent display of the collection and the changing temporary exhibition still exists today, these two modes now are much more interwoven and fragmented than cultural historians, as Bennett, Sherman, Rogoff, Greenberg, Ferguson, Nett, de Heesen, and others have described, starting more than 30 years ago. Their descriptions pointed to habits prior to the new millennium. Until then, art museums presented their collection as permanent exhibitions for extended, long periods with minimal change. Permanent exhibitions were distinct from short-running, special and temporary exhibitions. The stable presentation of a collection was considered as an essential and unchanging feature of a museum, representing the canon and durable validity. In the 1990s, significant intervention in the collection was still sporadic. Pioneering institutions at the time were the Whitney Museum in New York, the Tate Gallery in London, or the MMK Museum für Moderne Kunst in Frankfurt. The MMK Museum in Frankfurt was, under Jean-Christophe Amann, one of the first in changing the collection display regularly every 6 months by introducing the format Szenenwechsel, change of scene. As we will see later in our panel discussions, many museums today combine the display of their collection with temporary exhibitions. Presentations of the collection are increasingly considered as propositions. Each display is explicitly presented as a temporary proposal, as one proposal among many to reconfigure categorizations. For several years now, the focus had shifted away from retrospective, past-oriented view on historically grown collections that is only on display. Instead, curatorial work with collection explicitly highlights a present and future-oriented perspective. While this has always been an underlying part of collection presentation, it is now a central element of discourse. One of the last year's most present voices on the potential of collection was Claire Bishop. She has proposed in her programmatic essay, Radical Museology, the concept of a non-presentist dialectical contemporaneity, which, quote, seeks to navigate multiple temporalities with a more political horizon. Building upon Rosalind Krauss' critique of the late capitalist museum, Bishop calls on museums to develop an attitude that sets itself apart from the trends of the commercial art market and the biennials. The focus should be on contemporary themes, since curatorial work with historically grown collection allows to address both the history of an institution and its collection, including the specific local history and its regional topics and traumata, and the institution's current orientation, which must be discussed again and again. The inclusion of documents and archival material into the display, today often the case, was discussed and claimed in publications like hers. More than 30 years ago, several biennials, documentas, and exhibitions, such as Magiciens de la Terre, curated by Jean-Hubert Martin in Paris, or The Other Story, curated by Rachid Areen in London, as Oqui Envesor's The Short Century and Post-War in Munich, propagated the idea of pluriversal canons. The claim was to turn away from the narrative of progress in Western modernism, as it was represented in collection displays and in museum architecture over many decades. Instead, they aimed at representing the interweaving of artistic discourses, networks across borders and cultures, and at emphasizing solidarity, uniqueness, diversity. We can safely assume that these attitudes, however in detail, are broadly shared in the museum world. Most museums in democratic systems explicitly consider themselves as institutions of pluralistic societies, as self-reflexive institutions of critique that seek to showcase inclusion, global differences, and cultural diversity. This is why rehanging, experimenting with new formats, and so on, also with acquisitions, has become a common strategy to bridge the gap between the new discursive needs and the constraints of one's own collection that have been built up over decades or even a century. If we try to collect exhibitions of collections that could make it on the shortlist for a new edition of Exhibitions That Made Art History, one of the first and broadly discussed proposals for the reconfiguration of a modernist collection was on view in Paris in the Centre Pompidou from 2013 to 15. The Musée National d'Art Moderne exhibited parts of its rich collection as multiple modernities. The exhibition was one of the earliest in a major museum to contest the categories of the Western narrative. It integrated many different media, including magazines, photographs, films, architectural models, and furniture design. Multiple modernities followed the path that the artists had taken with regard to their travels, relocations, and immigrations to Paris. The exhibition linked the works to historical constellations and local networks in Paris in the first half of the 20th century. In terms of unusual display, the MASP in Sao Paulo reconstructed in 2015 the famous Cavaletes de Cristal, crystal easels, by architect Lina Bobardi to reconfigure its collection with diversity, plurality, and polyphony as the guiding themes. Bobardi's crystal easels were designed in 1968 to offer visitors physical proximity to the paintings, in addition to cognitive and visual perception. Moving without any guidance among and around the Cavaletes, visitors could experience the paintings from all sides as three-dimensional objects. The display presents them as an open grouping. No single painting can be viewed in isolation. They are always accompanied by others, at least in part. The Cavaletes, needless to remind you, experienced a resurrection in a small version at the Venice Biennial, but also in the depot in Rotterdam. It is worth considering for what purpose this complete openness can be a convincing model. It is tempting to argue that this gives too few clues, forces an idiosyncratic reception according to personal preference. This seems to be evident for visitors with little or no prior knowledge to place this radical display in any historical context. Presenting the collection as a forest of pictures, around 200 paintings in one gallery risks or even provokes the effect of overwhelming and disorientation. Although reinstalled in Venice and Rotterdam, it is hard to grasp how and in which situations this intervention of the late 60s can be exemplary today. In 2019, after several prior attempts, the Museum of Modern Art in New York abandoned the art historical narrative of Western modernism by introducing many small narratives. The overall structure adheres to a chronological division into three large sections. Each gallery space has its own time with a short its own theme with a short descriptive title. Rather than naming artistic styles, the titles describe places, social attitudes, or conditions. Transparency in architecture and beyond, for example, refers to plastic armchairs or Tupperware boxes, to expressions of political openness, such as the glass facade of the UN, and artistic concepts for examining power structures in art institutions, as a work by Hans Haacke. The separation of artistic media was abandoned. As a consequence, the display of the collection is curated by a team. Every few months, the curators intervene in the collection and change single rooms. Hardly any museum has the acquisition budget of the MoMA. Nearly a third of the exhibits 2019 were newly acquired, among them Ringgold's street scene and Tassila do Amaral's landscape. In the New York Art Times, critique Holland Cotter celebrated the new presentation of the collection as a stroke of curatorial genius. He concluded, I quote, "Multicultural is now marketable. To ignore it is to forfeit profit, not to mention critical credibility. And the new MoMA is obviously tailored to a new and younger audience." Others, as art historian Maura Rayleigh and Helen Moltworth, criticized the new concept as inconsistent and soft. Moltworth argued that Ringgold's street scene is not a source of disturbance to Picasso's iconic Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, on the contrary. Time and again, it was artistic approaches to museum collections in the form of temporary interventions or curatorial projects that transformed displays and provided fresh stimuli. The museum as Muse, we have seen it already yesterday, curated by Kynaston McShine and the MoMA, made this mode of intervention an exhibition theme. When Jean-Hubert Martin invited the artists Boromir Ecker and Thomas Huber to present the museum's collection as an artists' museum at the reopening of the Kunstpalast in Düsseldorf in 2001, this was, on the one hand, a large trend. On the other hand, his invitation was heavily criticized and, at least in Germany, became a symbol of the sellout of academic standards to the entertainment industry. The systematic involvement of contemporary artists in working with museum collections began in the late 1970s, experienced an initial boom in the 1990s, and has remained popular until today. The approaches range from celebrating, criticizing, or attacking the collection, from playful juxtapositions to investigative institutional critique. One of the first museums that regularly invited artists to work with its collection was a traditional art museum in the late 1970s, the National Gallery in London. For 13 years, the exhibition series The Artist's Eye has been running. In total, 10 artists participated, including Richard Hamilton, David Hockney, Francis Bacon, Lucian Freud, and Bridget Riley. The artists were invited to curate a cabinet exhibition in which paintings from the collection were to be combined with their own works. By inviting well-established British artists, the National Gallery highlighted the importance of its painting collection for the artistic generation of the present and opened up a variety of unfamiliar, unexpected perspectives on the collection. A similar concept of celebrating the museum's collection as a reservoir for contemporary artists was performed with the exhibition series Artist's Choice, introduced over 10 years later by the MoMA in New York, which exists until today. The famous contrast to these entertaining dialogues between tradition and contemporary are the investigative examinations of a museum collection by institutional critique artists as Hans Haake. In 1996, the Museum Boisman van Beuningen in Rotterdam had invited him to work with its collections. His exhibition title, Viewing Matters, conceived as a play on words, summarized Haake's project. Haake brought out of the darkness of the depot into the light of the showroom the problematic aspects of the collection and the institutional history of the Museum Boisman van Beuningen. He installed 6 lattice walls in dense rows, thus creating a depot situation in the exhibition space. In 5 thematic sections, he revealed the dark sides of the museum's collection history, the role of private collectors, colonial aspects, and the sale of Jewish property in the late 30s. Today, artistic interventions in art museums are standard practice. Artistic curating has become a new form of site-specific art. Exemplary is the display Hungry for Time, an invitation to epistemic disobedience by the New Delhi-based collective Rax Media Collective for the reopening of the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna in 2021. Working across different media and disciplines, the collective reinterpreted the collection from a decolonial perspective. They developed precisely coordinated installations combining historical objects from the collection with site-specific new productions. For these new productions, they invited other artists or provided their own works. The display was structured as a sequence of 10 scenes with a prologue and an epilogue. Instead of wall text, poetic aphorisms command on the assemblage. The explicit claim, disobedience, was to challenge the established, that was even in 2021 still, of course, the Western episteme. This may be enough as a reminder of the basket of last decade's attempts to intervention in the field that we will discuss today. Our discussions are standing on the shoulders of various efforts, propositions, disobedience, and so on that I have tried to briefly sketch. I may finish with a reminder of the also repetitive criticism of the new strategies dealing with museum collections and some questions. Aesthetization, associative, and ahistorical are often mentioned. What are current display criteria? On what do museums agree? What significance do historically grown collections still have? Does opening them up mean a less of authority? In art historical expertise and its institutional context contested, which public groups prefer which reconfigurations? We are about to discuss these questions and others with the directors of 5 museums. And of course, that is a small selection. Their museums are differently funded, and because of their geographies, they have different experiences and perspectives, ranging from Western and Eastern Europe to Southern and Northern Europe, as well as the United Arab Emirates. Their collections were founded under different historical and social circumstances, and their current positions is shaped by various political issues and colonial histories. Museums are collective expressions of what we consider important in terms of culture, and they articulate this through the way they display their collections. Self-legitimization and providing spaces for reflection, debate, and care becomes more difficult for museums to defend, but remains one of their main tasks. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stefanie, for this great mapping of the field for our discussion today. I think that will be very important for the next 2 panels, or we have 2 panels, maybe 3 panels, 2 panels and a discussion in between. And let us come to our first panel now, titled Broadening the Past, Shaping the Present. And I will introduce very briefly the 3 speakers and discussion partners today who present 3 outstanding museums and exceptional collections with strong histories and strong figures maybe in the past. The main question we will address now on this first panel is how these collections with their respective histories are being reshaped today, not only by adding new works of art, but also by discovering new narratives and modes of display. To put it short, how can we establish new perspectives within our institutions without cutting off their histories, or maybe at some points we need to have sharp cuts? We have 3 speakers, and the first speaker is coming from Stockholm, from the Moderna Museet, Gitte Orsko. She's director of the Moderna Museet in Stockholm since 2019. Before, she was director at the Kunstmuseum of Modern Art in Aalborg, and from 2009 to 2019, before that, she has been chief curator at the Aarhus Art Museum and president of the Danish Art Foundation. Manuel Segade comes from Madrid today. He is director of the Museo Nacional Centro de Arte Reina Sofía in Madrid. And before that, he was director of the Museo Centro de Arte dos Mayo in Móstoles. And he has realized many projects as curator. Let me mention the Spanish pavilion at the 57th Venice Biennale with Jordi Colomer. And we will see many of our speakers and discussion partners have been curators in Venice, the next one as well. Susanne Gensheimer, here the person from the house, director of the Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Westfalen in Düsseldorf, K20 and K21, here in Düsseldorf. From 2009 to 2017, she was director in Frankfurt as the MMK Museum für Moderne Kunst, and she has curated the German pavilion at the Venice Biennale 2011 for Christoph Schlingensief, who was awarded the Golden Lion. Susanne is also honorary professor at the Frankfurt University and teaches regularly at the Goethe University in the curatorial studies program. Thank you very much for being with us today. And everybody is giving a short 10 minutes statement, and then we will open the discussion together. And Gitte, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me and to make this a statement. I can add to your presentation that I curated my first pavilion in Venice in 2003 with Olafur Eliasson. And there Olafur started by going up to the roof and attack the pavilion from the roof. So I think that kind of laid the path for my curatorial practice I learned from an artist. So my statement today will be a visual statement. I have 82 slides with me, and I take the liberty of taking the perspective of the audience. So please allow yourself to be audience for a while. Go into the visual presentation. It will just be circling when I do my statement. It's a pleasure to be here today to share how we at Moderna Museet are rethinking not only what we present from our collection, but how we invite people to engage with it. Museums can no longer be content with being guardians of art. We must also be generous hosts, open, responsive, and inclusive. And so we ask ourselves a simple but vital question. What does it mean to truly share a collection? At Moderna Museet, we don't believe in a single fixed version of art history, not one authoritative voice, not one path through our galleries. We see art history and our collection as something plural, multiple, alive, a collection of stories waiting to be discovered and reimagined. And we recognize that as a museum, we are constantly writing, rewriting, and questioning the art histories we put on displays. Our collection holds over 100,000 works of modern and contemporary art, each with its own context, each with its own voice. To reflect that richness, we've moved away from the traditional linear master narrative. Instead, we now present the collection in chapters, each one exploring a particular focus. Some zoom in on certain periods and geographies. Others open up broader themes: identity, materiality, representation. And each chapter lives for 1 year or 2 years, and then it changes. This keeps our collection in motion, alive, relevant, and in flux. And yes, sometimes this leads to surprising results. For instance, Robert Rauschenberg was a surrealist? Well, in the context of our current hanging on surrealist traces in the collection, perhaps he was. There's also a question of just basic sustainability. With so many works in our care, in our storage, why ship art from across the globe when we can walk into our own storage and make astonishing discoveries? And then there's a question of what defines a highlight, a key work. Can we, as a museum, challenge and expand the canon, redefining what counts as significant through the way we display and frame our works? That said, we can't ignore that visitors often come looking for specific works. The canon may be persistent, but we've chosen to meet it in our own terms. And that's why we've reimagined the Pontus Hultén Study Gallery, and it's somewhere on this very fast-moving slideshow. Is a concept that actually was created over 20 years ago, when Pontus Hultén, the founding and legendary director of Moderna Museet, donated his collection, and the architect Renzo Piano designed a living archive, 4 mobile screens, each curated with works from the collection. So today, in our study gallery, key works are gathered that may not be part of the current chapters. Visitors can revisit the canon, or better yet, assemble their own. The experience is theirs to shape. To further break open the idea of a fixed narrative, we've invited artists to co-curate the collection with us. So far, we've worked with Rashid Johnson and Mauricio Catalan, 2 radically different voices. They've each brought their own eye, their own sensibility, and crucially, their own questions. And their intervention have sparked powerful conversations. Who gets to write art history? What voices have been excluded? And how can we distribute power within the museum space? And these collaborations haven't just challenged our audience, they've challenged us and made us see our collection with new eyes. From the very beginning, we decided to treat each chapter as an exhibition in its own right. And that strategy has worked. We've seen strong press coverage, especially internationally. Our story is traveling. But more importantly, visitor surveys show us that 45% of our international visitors come specifically now to see the collection. And 58% say they've noticed the new way we display it. And 53% tells us that they return more frequently, precisely because of the evolving chapter-based presentations. And to me, these are not just statistics. They are signs that our audience feels more connected, more engaged, and more curious. They come back not for repetition, but for renewal. And at the end of the day, museums are Wunderkammers, cabinets of curiosity, and we need to keep that curiosity alive. At the core of all this is a belief: a museum should not be a monologue, it should be a conversation. We don't aim to deliver fixed truth. We aim to create space for reflection, for multiple interpretations, and yes, for disagreement. Our visitors are not passive spectators. They are co-creators of meaning. Our role is to offer tools, encounters, and unexpected juxtapositions that invite them to forge their own path through the collection. Yesterday, Karen asked a crucial question. How do we make people understand what we are doing? I don't think you actually answered to that. I'll try to answer it. We trust our audience. We believe that they can handle complexity. We believe they want more than one story. We don't want to over-explain or over-direct. We want to invite. We are here for the broad public, and we long for their devotion. That's what gives us both the power and the responsibility to build new narrative, new canons, and new perspective with openness, playfulness, and care. And we're very excited about the journey we've started. We are committed to continue it, not with a definitive statement, but with an ongoing dialogue. Because the collection of Moderne Museet doesn't just live in a space, it moves through time. In 3 months, a new chapter will open, and our hope that our audience will binge-watch their way through the collection and keep coming back for more. At the end of the day, Moderne Museet is based in Sweden. In Sweden, we believe in folkhemmet, that the society is home for the people. And that is our guiding principle. Thank you.
Nice, good morning. So, thank you, and thanks for the invitation to the K21 too. I will go really back in the past for 5 minutes, I hope, and then to an example of what we are doing in the collection of the museum. I will refer to a publication. It's a kind of a prologue for a book that I'm still writing for the future. It's called Endless Species. That is precisely a theory of display and how, I'm going to simplify a lot because I only have these minutes, but maybe the organization can share the publication with you if you're interested. So this is a salon of the 19th century. This is one of the first public museums in Europe. In Florence, La Specola is a museum of natural history with these anatomical boxes, really famous, but was also one of the first natural history museums. And the theory in that book refers precisely on how the genealogy of the display we use in contemporary art, so from conceptual art on, comes not from exhibitions of art, comes precisely from the nature of these hierarchical and really clear white background presentations of natural history from the 16th century on, So this is a kind of a joke, but I think the link is clear anyway. Clear in the sense of MoMA in the 60s or Reina Sofia in the 2000s, no? This is the background idea. I couldn't avoid make this joke with the presentation of yesterday because it's exactly at the same time that the French Revolution was being done that Cuvier was dissecting the Hottentot Venus, so Sylvia Harman, this woman that was exhibited in this museum. Her vagina was exhibited in this museum by Cuvier, and Cuvier organized this display that you can see still now in the Galerie de Paléontologie, the paleontological gallery and compared anatomy in Paris. That is the Museum of Natural History of the Jardin des Plantes. And as you see, a man, not a woman, Adam, is like a écorché, without the skin, but being the first in a row of animals that are in the background of him, you know? So it's the evolution of a species already, pre-Darwin, but at the same time is the sensation of Adam is still naming all the animals, you know, like with God, giving him the power of them before Eva is created. So, you know, like the vehicle, you know, it's amazing how the vehicle of freedom and revolution, I mean, I think everything is clear, no? At the same time, you know, that there is another point that for me is really interesting, that is this, you know, the museums of natural history, since they were born, were for natural history. And then, you know, the historical museums, like Met, for example, in the States, starts with the Egyptian culture, no? Before, so all the originary people are mammals, are part of the natural history. And they're shown in the natural history museums, no? One of the most interesting in Europe is the one in Bucharest, because it was one of the first showing precisely, how do you call dioramas, no? Dioramas at the period. And this Grigori Agrippa, no? Museum. And this is one of these first dioramas of the end of the 19th century. And at the same time, you have, you know, the African tribes and the Inuits as part of the, you know, it's the end of the narrative of the museum itself, as a kind of a spiral. And even, you know, this is the 70s, Washington, D.C., Natural History Museum of the Smithsonian. Look at the plan, look up, and you see Indian cultures, you see African cultures, you see Asian cultures as part of the you know, animal world. That I think is kind of interesting to understand how these things were built. This is almost a joke too, because this is part of the National History Museum in New York yet. No? They are reconceptualizing it, of course, giving it content, but this encounter, you know, of the civilization of the New Amsterdam, the early New York, and the Indians, no? The originary people is part of the display itself, and is the precisely meaning of how you understand nature and culture in a European context of modernity. So what I'm trying to bring here is just, you know, like how we can use, to simplify, how we can use the same system of display when this language is so contaminated with imperialism, extractivism, misogyny, racism, go on, no? Extinction, if you want the world to be more clear, no? Yeah, so quickly enough, this was the let's say theoretical introduction, and this of course is Reina Sofia Museum and our DNA painting that is Guernica, as you know. And I will insist in this because, you know, Guernica was only brought to Spain, was never in Spain, was shown in the pavilion in the 37 in Paris, as you know, during the Civil War in Spain. Also as a propaganda machine for the Republican people in Spain trying to fight the raising of the fascist Franco army. And, you know, this painting only came back, was in custody in MoMA by the Picasso will. You know, Picasso left in his will that it only come back. It could only come back if Spain had a modern democracy and a free nation. No? So the painting came in the 84 after the last, the only coup d'etat we had in the 83 in Spain. So the 7 years after Franco died, the army tried to get back the nation, and of course they couldn't. That was nice. But at the same time, you know, you need to think that this space where Picasso is was precisely receiving bombs from Germany and bombing from Italy at the period. You know, these bombings over Madrid. That, you know, Guernica is just the bombings on the Basque Country. But it's interesting to know that this was a hospital since 400 years before. So it was a royal foundation to be the first public hospital in Madrid. So you can imagine that it's a place of care, but at the same time it's a place of exclusionary practices of bodies for 400 years. You know, for 400 years was the place where in Madrid people was deciding whose bodies should be saved and whose bodies should be left to die. You know, I mean, I think it's a clear remembering of this display quality I was talking, these languages that are staying in the building itself in a way. But at the same time, you know, like in the same room, Guernica is, the amputated bodies of the Madrid people, you know, the civilians of Madrid that were receiving the bombing were cured or left to die in the same space. which is also a memory that is not in our captions and that should be there, and we're trying to do that for the new display. So we are preparing a new display for next year of the collection. We are rehanging everything and rereading the collection itself, moving it also in the building structure, changing the architecture a lot. And I'm bringing this because, you know, there was a kind of a spirit, as I was showing the image of how the display of the Reina Sofia is traditionally shown. You know, Reina Sofia had a language that pretended to be like objective, you know, and scientific. You know, one thing after the other, everything clean and in a white box. That at the end, you know, pretends to be no language, but is a persuasive language by itself. You know, is the naturalization and pretend to be objective of a language that is also a way of propaganda. You know what I mean? Like everything that we can use in a museum. So what we can do, we're preparing right now, is precisely to make a lot of different ways of showing, you know, a lot of different languages of displays living together precisely to show how, you know, which are the languages we are using and which are the values or the ethical backgrounds that they communicate or they're embedded in them. So the first joke or, you know, twist we are going to make is to invert or reverse modernity in a sense, bringing a designer that is an artist. Xavier Salaverria is a Basque sculptor. This is a piece by him, and this is a setting, an installation design for an exhibition made by him. He uses, as you see, patterns of modern display, really classical modernity, but at the same time, you know, like I think we can reverse, you know, precisely talking about the 70s until the present, that is the new floor that we are constructing for next year, is precisely talking about the last decades in a display that doesn't belong to them, that is totally anachronic to them, you know, it's anachronism from the 20s and 30s, you know. So we hope this has an effect. This is the only image I can show you for the future. For example, how the expressionism of, you know, the trans avant-garde from the 80s can be shown precisely isolating these geniuses and these macho painters, you know, but at the same time, you know, ironically melting them with the spectators and the phenomenologies of the space that the spectator can live, no? But well, this is I want to go to just an example because it's easier to explain how we're working. We can talk later deeper. But, you know, like how we can produce this performative thing that precisely preserves complexity. You know, you were talking about complexity, and I totally agree. You know, like to preserve complexity is a really meaningful task, political meaningful task of the museums of contemporary art nowadays. But at the same time, you know, there is this term of Raymond Williams that I really love, that is selective tradition. You know, tradition needs to be reconstructed, cannot be just received. You know, like without critique. So, you know, we are making the first room. This is the first room of the new presentation of the collection, and we'll have these pieces from the 70s from some critical artists with the Franco regime. Of course, this is the gray reality of the street, of the public arena during a dictatorship. I think this doesn't need an explanation, no? This is the year Franco died. But this is even much more interesting. As you see, you know, in the 71, a gallery in Spain, of course, Picasso was forbidden in Spain. His work is forbidden in Spain during Franco regime because he was a communist and was against Franco, of course. And this gallery, Theo, decided to make an exhibition of the Suite Bollard, you know, one of the most famous engraving series of Picasso. And they were destroyed by the fascists, you know. They entered there, young fascist group, and destroyed the pieces. But the gallery still keeps them destroyed, you know, and we are bringing them to the museum. At the same time, you know, some artists that were coming back to Spain, but still fighting Franco from inside, like Miro, came back from exile at the end of the 60s, was doing these burnt paintings at the period. And Ocaña was a really important performance artist, a trans queer artist, that was making this paper huge, was really religious, Ocaña, and was producing these amazing altarpieces that were brought to the street in ceremonies and processions, with him transvestite and dressed as a virgin as a part of it. And, you know, like a naked, half naked, but with the, really interesting figure that you can check out. There are a lot of films about him, but it's a really, really really important performance artist of Barcelona of the period. So, you know, imagine he died, Ocaña died, burned, because she burned himself. You know, like he was like using fireworks for a performance in the street, dressed as a sun with paper, and you know these fireworks burned him, and he died because of these complications. So I bring this just as the last thing. Wait a second. Oh, I cannot advance. There is a possibility that the technician can put from the minute to 45 seconds? 2 minutes, 45 seconds. It's just in the middle of, thank you. Because I was not seeing the, I think it's, I can? No, I'll let you. So, you know, like what I'm showing right now is precisely a performance moment of Margarita. This is the 70 in Barcelona in the Copacabana bar. That was a flamenco queer bar of the period during the Franco regime. These places existed even during the dictatorship. And it's 2:45. Sorry. in my computer seemed easy. Well, yeah, it's there. Perfect. That's okay. Thank you. So I'm going to talk over it because this is Margarita. Well, as you see, sorry, Margarita is the you know is like getting all this together because he's the one to accept, to be in flames, but at the same time extinguish the fire, as you see. And you know, I just want to remember talking about history and how we collide history in museums with this connective layering and this effective relationality we can produce through the pieces. I remember the sentence of Jameson, of the philosopher, that I really like, that is history is what hurts. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Gitte. Thank you, Manuel. I'm gonna speak today on a very practical level about what we did here at Kunstsammlung at the K20 collection since I arrived in 2017. Later, I think it was in 2019 or 18 when you arrived, Vivian. 19? Oh, 21 only. Okay, 21. Vivian was our new head of collection, and we were working together on this process. So most of the acquisitions we did together, and also the current presentation, which you can see maybe later in the lunch break, is a very close collaboration between Vivian and me. But before I talk about the collection, I would like to introduce the institution shortly. Because I believe we have to understand very precisely who we are and what tasks and responsibilities does this entail before we can work in a meaningful and sustainable way. So who are we here at Kunstsammlung? Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Westfalen with K20 and K21 is the only states museum in North Rhine-Westphalia for modern and contemporary art. As such, the museum represents the most populous and largest federal state in Germany, comprising the Rhineland, the Ruhr region, and Westphalia. Going through a long period of profound structural change as one of the most industrialized regions in Germany, North Rhine-Westphalia today has a very heterogeneous population with a very high proportion of people with migrant backgrounds, extreme historically determined class differences, and a great cultural diversity. As a public museum, it is both our task and our responsibility to reflect this diversity in our program and to address the different demographic groups through a multi-layered program, thus opening up the institution to a broad audience. With regard to our collection, this means that we must have found, I hope we found, or we must find ways to build bridges between the historical collection and our new audiences, as well as between the different perspectives of our diverse visitors and those who are not yet coming to us. We can only accomplish that by first addressing our own history and at the same time by willing to learn from our environment in an ongoing process. So very quickly, I want to introduce the history, the founding history of this museum. The Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Westfalen was founded in 1961 as a cultural political act of reparation in the newly founded federal state of North Rhine-Westphalia in post-war Germany. However, the museum's roots go back to 1933, when Paul Klee was dismissed by the National Socialists from the Düsseldorf Academy, where he had been professor since 1931. All of these original documents you can also find in our presentation upstairs. In 1960, the state of North Rhine-Westphalia therefore acquired a group of 88 works by Paul Klee from the famous collection of George David Thompson, US collector. And the state decided to do this particular acquisition to implement a significant act of cultural political reparation and a tribute to the artist. On the basis of this group of works by Paul Klee, the idea of founding a museum of modern art for North Rhine-Westphalia was pursued. In order to communicate this cultural act of reparation internationally, Paul Klee's works were sent to an international tour through 37 countries and continents in the whole world between 1966 and 1985. In 1962, art historian Werner Schmalenbach was appointed as founding director. Earlier, he was director of the Kästner Gesellschaft in Hanover and member of the committee of the Documenta II, 1959, and III, 1964. Werner Schmalenbach was highly influenced by Werner Haftmann, who was the artistic director, one of the artistic directors of the first three Documentas, together with Arnold Bode, and his particular narration of modern art as he manifested it in his book Painting in the 20th Century. It's interesting that one can see in our collection that several key works, like for example the Jackson Pollock, number 32, and the Wassily Kandinsky, composition 4, were, so to say, acquired directly from this Documenta context. Like you can see how they are installed at Documenta in those years. Werner Schmalenbach stood at Kunstsammlung until 1990, so nearly 30 years. Schmalenbach developed the idea of a museum of masterpieces from the field of European and American modernism. His focal points were French avant-garde with Picasso, Braque, Modigliani, etc., as well as Surrealism and German Expressionism. Besides one exception, he did not acquire any work of a female or non-Western artist. These are just some examples of one of these masterpieces he was able to acquire for the Kunstsammlung. In the field of post-war modernism, he also focused on Europe and North America. During his directorship, exactly 2 women artists were added to the collection. That was Maria Helena Vieira da Silva, which was his first acquisition because he did an exhibition with Helena Vieira da Silva at the Kästner Gesellschaft in Hanover directly before he came, and Lee Bonteque, beautiful work which came into the museum as a donation. After 1990, Armin Zweite opened up the collection to contemporary art, also particularly with Joseph Beuys, but also US minimalism, and he started also to integrate photography in the collection. You can see here very famous work of Katharina Sieverding. And then it was thanks to Maren Ackermann, who followed Armin Zweite, that she could acquire a large part of the private collection of Dorothee and Konrad Fischer. Thus this whole field of conceptual art was also included into the collection. But in the field of early and post-war modernism, there were no further acquisitions. So when I arrived here in Düsseldorf in 2017, I felt an urgent necessity to modernize and diversify the collection and to initiate a process of change. And we defined 3 guidelines which we were following then, and as like 3 main guidelines. One was that we urgently have to work on reaching gender balance and global internationality. The second was that we have to extend the collection within its intrinsic DNA. So it means within the guidelines and the focus lines in the collection as they are already, to avoid arbitrariness. And then the third guideline, which was the most difficult one, was to maintain quality standards. So this means that we systematically focused on acquisitions of works by female and non-Western artists. But this all is regard to our collection in K20. The contemporary collection in K21 is a totally different story. So I'm just really talking now today about early modernism and post-war modernism. So I can show you some examples of what we acquired. For example, we acquired beautiful works of female early abstract painters. We acquired female and non-Western, we acquired works by female and non-Western minimalists. We acquired works by artists, non-Western artists, which related in a very particular way to artists from our collection. Another example is that we acquired some works from the exhibition of the Surrealist group from Cairo, and added that to our Surrealist works, which is like a very, very large group of works in our collection. To give you a short evaluation, I think it became clear that it was really important that we modernize the collection by gender balancing it, by including global perspectives, and you can see here that in the acquisitions in the last 7 years, in terms of gender, we nearly have a 50-50 situation now, which is really a lot in contrast to before. And in terms of diversity, we have at least like 31% non-Western artists. And in terms of the presentation, of the current presentation, it's not so much, but also we are on a good way. And it's, of course, still in process what we are doing. And you can see that we have like 38% female artists in the current presentation. and at least 20% non-Western artists. So thank you very much for your attention.
We go on the outside, Stefanie and me, and we'll start here, or wherever you want. Yes, thank you so much. It was really great, these three inputs from three very different institutions, and that brought us back to the first discussions Stefanie and I had a few months ago when we started to think about that. We talked a lot, or we found we talked about this metaphor of a DNA. Because every institution, every collecting institution, every museum has something, and I think several of you mentioned this metaphor already, a DNA. And a DNA is something, when we think about our DNAs, we have it, and it's defining our personality, and we better don't change that. But we know from all of your institutions, and we know from our discussions, that in the DNA of a museum, somehow has to be in flux. And I think with all the three institutions, they had very strong DNAs in their respective histories. And how would you react on this level of a DNA which is somehow dangerous to change, but also necessary to change? And I think that you gave great examples already for that. Who wants to start, maybe react on that?
Okay, thank you. I think when it comes to our museum, Moderna Museet, just to give a brief history, was established in 1958 as the little brother to the National Museum. We are a state museum, and the founding director was Pontus Hultin. And Pontus Hultin was like cruising all over the world, establishing first the Moderna Museet, then the Centre Pompidou, then LA MoCA, and then the Kunstmuseum in Bonn. And he was also involved in the Museum Tangley as well as the P.K. Guggenheim. So he was really surfing on the establishing the new idea of the modern museum. But I think that what we try to extract from him and his legacy is that on the one hand, he really believed in artists. He co-curated, collaborated with artists. For example, right now there's an exhibition in Paris focusing on his collaboration with Nigel de Saint-Phalle and Jean Tangley. And the playfulness he brought into the role of a museum is very important for us. But on the other hand, we have the exact same story as you here in Düsseldorf, namely a collection that mainly consists of male Western artists, except from Nigel de Saint-Phalle from our part. So I think we have to, I think it's a bit like, to be how you relate to your parent. You mean, as you mature.
And you all have strong superfathers, yeah? All three of you,
when you mature as a child, you're pretty annoyed with your parents. And sometimes I'm pretty annoyed with the male Western art history. But now, when we mature, we also we try to keep alive the playfulness and the belief in artists, and how do we translate it into today with a critical perspective, with the aim to diversify our collection. So I think the DNA is actually a good metaphor, because it's about heritage and legacy. You bring it with you, but you're also able to change it if you put your awareness to it.
I'm going to get more biological and technical, but just because, you know, like we know Lynn Margulis, I think everybody knows Lynn Margulis, no? She writes theory and biology, and she's a biologist. And you know, she, since the 80s, she's stating how viruses are central for evolution, for the changes of a species, and for the share of DNA content on the species. So these contaminations and illnesses like HIV or like COVID really reprogram the production of protein in our bodies and change the production of DNA. This is why people has persistent COVID, had memory problems after COVID, had things that change the way the body works and rewrite the DNA production and the reproduction of the DNA in the body. So I think in the sense of diversity and these things, you know, if we think about a museum like a body, like an ecosystem by itself, that of course is never isolated, the only way life can survive and be produced and reproduced is through interdependency and difference. Because if not, a biome is never viable. You know what I mean? So I think this is the point. You know, like if we are dealing with this and producing these different narratives, it's not just because this is part of a trend in politics or whatever, it's because it's central to the living machine that are our museums by themselves, I think.
But it's also a question of restraints and necessities. Like we wouldn't have had the means to entirely change the whole collection, and also our collection is very small. So we don't have, like you, this huge fundus, or the MoMA, for example, where you can really draw from so many different fields of art and periods. We have a very small collection, so we really had to think, how can we do something senseful with what we have? And our constraints were really, really narrow. So for us, it would make only sense to stay within this structure, but then to open it up as much as we can, but then of course in a senseful way. Like for example, the quality standards, yeah, these extremely high quality standards Schmalenbach established, you can question them, of course, what means quality to whom, yeah? But if you acquire a work by a female artist, hang it next to Picasso, and it cannot hold it, it's negative for the work of the female artist. And it would kind of underline some prejudice that the female artist is not as strong, cannot be a masterpiece as the male artist. And that was something Schmalenbach thought. He thought so. He even said so sometimes. I never found the quote, but there's a quote, isn't it? Yeah. So it's also about necessities. Yeah? It's not that you have a complete carte blanche and as much money as you want.
And I think the point of the iconic works in a collection, what I also have shown with the Demoiselles d'Avignon, that is a great challenge because you need them as a point of references for the audience, and at the same time it's very difficult what could be the new neighbors, yeah?
I also would like to add, it's also about the audience, because we have a new audience, but we also have a traditional audience. And the traditional audience wants to find its works, its beloved works, and then you have to build a bridge between the old, the existing collection and new work, but also the old audience and the new audience. And if you would erase everything, it would be, of course, extremely confrontational, and also not. It would be also. It would be not. How shall I say? It would not honor what was done before. It was not only negative but also positive.
That's something you say about identity, I think. And the museum has not just a DNA, it's what's coming out from a DNA, it's an identity. And often identity comes with some works of art which belong to an audience. So the audience comes and wants to see something and have this idea when I think of the Moderna Museum, there's the monogram coming in my mind right away. So we have to
probably keep something of that.
But I would not say we don't have to change identity, because the identity was exactly what we wanted to change. Yeah, this museum, for example, had the identity of being a very elitarian space. This is also manifested in this architecture consciously that time. And this is something we want to change. So I think the DNA is not bad. It's a good metaphor.
But I think I would like to challenge that a little bit, the idea that the key works from the masterpiece of the collection, then they have like an embedded quality. I think this is also something that we have shaped generation to acknowledge. This is a masterpiece. We have framed it, so we have an obligation to constantly rethink the idea of the masterpiece. And what is like artistic quality? What does it mean for a person today to watch a Picasso work and so on? And also, I think the notion that the new audience want the new things. Actually, our survey shows us that in order when we get a new audience, that's when the more traditional we get, the more audience we get. Which means that young people who are not used to go to museums, they come there for like the canonic artist. And actually, the most our audience that are very with us all the time, they are more willing to experiment because they trust us. So for us, it's a way, what we try also to do with our chapter thinking is to really build trust with the audience and join us in this. Come on, now we're doing something new, also with the old masters. Let's see what happens. Please trust us in that process.
Talking about the audience, maybe you could shortly describe your audience, because I think in the three houses, they are quite different. International, more local. I mean, could you shortly describe who you have in mind when you work with your collection?
So we just made a survey recently, 3 months ago, I think it came the results. We have 57% of tourists, so foreign audiences in the museum, mostly from European, French, Italian, and from the US also, really a lot. But this is also because tourism in Madrid is rising lately. And, you know, like the locals mostly visit the temporary exhibitions. That I think is also important. One thing that we were surprised with is that, you know, that the 73% of the audiences are less than 35 years old.
Oh,
which is
so
incredible for a museum this big. 73, you know, which is a lot, and we never knew that, and we think that this is because, you know, in Madrid you have really huge museums like Prado, Thyssen, or Reina Sofia. You need to select, I guess, if you come there, to which one you want to visit, and I guess the younger people wants to see maybe more contemporary art or maybe modern art. I don't know, but this is really interesting thing because we know that Prado has really a really old age audience, like in a basis. So yeah, we need to get deep into this.
Yes, I think we have the more or less same profile when it comes to tourists. More than 50% of our visitors are only there for once in their life. And that's also a guiding principle for us, that we want we can't expect the visitors to come back again and again. So also our chapter thinking is also based on the idea that we want to expand our local audience, because that's less than 30% of our visitors. We're not that good in young visitors, though. It's still high educated female visitors, around 53, that comes to the museum. So this is something that we are really, really keen on and working on in different ways.
But it's also mostly women too. You know, it's more than 50% women, which is also interesting.
So we haven't done yet this, this precise analysis. We are still in the middle of doing this, but we do not have tourists. We have a very small percentage of tourists. And our audience is the local audience, which is not only Düsseldorf, but also all the parts of North Rhine-Westphalia. We have to do a program which reaches families in Essen, in Duisburg, in Dortmund, and North Rhine-Westphalia, as I said, has a high percentage of people with a migration background and a big international diversity. For example, North Rhine-Westphalia has the largest Arabic and Asian community in Germany. So, I mean, it's so little what we do. Like, we have like 2 maybe artists from Arabic states in our collection. We still have to do much, much more, but we can see that the audience has changed already and that it became already more international, more diverse. Also, we can see that younger people are coming more, so it has already effects. I'm sure not enough, and we have to work on that further. But what we want to do now is this analysis. Who exactly is our audience, but also who exactly is not our audience yet. Yeah? This is actually maybe the even more important point.
If I just can add to that, Modern Museet has, we have a museum in Malmö, in the southern part of Sweden as well, where we have the same profile. And there we, quite some years ago, we started to have Arab texts in Arab in our museum. And that has really changed the demography of our visitors, because we have many new people coming there, and they feel more at home. Just a simple thing to change the text into Arabic.
Yeah, but this is interesting. We were speaking about that with our department for education, and they said the Arabic, also the population with Arabic migration background, they are all German. And they do speak German. They have Arabic background, but they are German. They are either born here or living already very long here. They go to school here. So they do know German, and using Arabic language would discriminate them because it would imply they don't speak German. It's delicate.
That's again an interesting point, because you made you used it several times, the term trust. You once said, we want to trust our audience, and later on you said in our discussion, the audience trusts us, and that I think I found very interesting. How, because when we talk about discrimination, that's about mistrust. We think we need to help them, or different audiences, and I found this very interesting when we're talking about trust.
Trust and host, I think, being a host. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think this is something that we aim for, and trust is something that you build slowly. So we have different ways of building connections with our audience. For example, we have a youth council. We have it's like 15 young people between, I think, 16 and 21. They get a salary to be on the council. They advise us. They collaborate with us. And this is a way of, like, you know, building in small, like, taking small baby steps into building trust with your audience. And I think the way that I was also very inspired to hear your presentation, Suzanne, and to see the hanging here, because I also really feel that what you're being very careful. You're being very careful in the way that you created this new No, there's a lot of sensibility in the space, in a way. And you're not trying to over-explain, you're not trying to over-direct, you're trying to be very open. And I think that, you know, people can feel that. Something that is like in the space. So we didn't find that. We're still trying to build trust with our audience. And it's a journey.
And you, in the same way, you talked about curiosity, and you showed cabinets of wonders. So we are still, we somehow, how I understand you, we have to stay in this tradition also of being surprising institutions. One quote from Peter Sloterdijk came in my mind in the late 80s. He once said, museums have to be schools of alienations, which is very strange what he said. But when I understood you, there has to be something to be curiosity or being strange about our institutions. Or would you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. In that book that I told you, I think that one of the final sentence of the prologue is precisely a sentence of Foucault that says we need a new era of curiosity. That was one of the final statements of the words and things, And I think is right, the crisis of experience is clear, through the screen world, in the sense of the effective presence and phenomenological presence of someone in an exhibition space, and what we were talking about yesterday, the new media and the new translations of art pieces in the immersive experiences and whatever, and people is used to such a lot of exhibition spaces that we see right now in this MOCO and this kind of secondary museums, if you want, sorry to tell it like that, but really successful, are like, how do you call it? Like the scenes in the plateaus you see in TV for a TV show that are like rooms of stimuli for autistic children. You know what I mean? Totally like and unfortunately this is precisely an overloading of information that gets you out of curiosity. It's impossible to make any question. It's impossible to have any doubt because you don't have time. You only have just things coming to you. And I think, the calm aesthetics of the presentation, I also find it really powerful in this sense, because you feel, the spaces are big, but at the same time slow enough, and, to analyze or to stay, if you want, in any of the rooms. And I think this is also something really important, how to empty this quality of really, everything is information, and,
If we would have more work and a bigger collection, maybe it wouldn't be so empty. Maybe it would be much fuller and abwechslungsreicher.
But I think the idea of thinking about attention spans is very important in our days. I mean, to think what are the time frames we want to present, and how do we react to the younger audience who is much more has much more used to very short formats. And maybe we should also talk about, you talked about chapters, I talked about propositions as a common idea, and about to combine much more the different formats between the permanent and the temporary exhibition. Maybe we could also talk about a little about this, because you dealing differently with these formats.
Well, I think one of our ambitions is that we actually don't want the audience to distinguish to what is permanence and what is temporary exhibitions. So when you come to Modern Musée today, you have 3 collection exhibitions, and we have 3 temporary exhibitions at the same time. So our ambition is to really maintain the wonders of art, so to speak. I mean, we want people to feel empowered when they come there. We want them to be open. We want them to trust us in a way that really shows the richness of what we hold in our belongings. So I think that museums today really have to balance, on the one hand, being authoritative places, because we have a long tradition and we are places of authority, but on the other hand, we are also in a landscape of all these experience-based spaces where people go to have experiences. So we can't expect people to enter a museum and really go there for 2 hours of pure Bildung, So that's what we have to balance. And that's not easy. Sometimes we become over-enthusiastic, and sometimes we could become over-explaining. But I think we're learning.
No, I think we have no ambition to missionieren, yeah, to mission. As we don't have a very particular mission which we want to, but we see ourselves more as a public space. Karen was saying was speaking about the contested public space, which I found interesting. But we should offer a place where people can feel well and which they can use for whatever purpose they think at this moment is right for them. So if they just want to spend half an hour in a nice place where it's quiet, like a little bit, like for example, they could also go to a church. And if they want to relax a little bit, if they want to hear some music, for example, with our audio guide, that's fully enough. They don't have to understand everything in its full art historical dimension. And otherwise, some people who want to have a really good guided tour, they can have and get that. But we should not approach from our own from our own also how we are and we are not the role model. Yeah? We are not the role model. We ourselves and also the curators and the museums team is not the role model. Mm-hmm. We are just one. We can only offer. This is the only thing we can. We have to be careful with what we have, but we are not the role model. Mm-hmm.
I totally agree. I think the perfect museum is a place where to lose time, precisely, out of the productivity of other kind of activities. And I always remember a definition of the Encyclopedia of Diderot, about museums, that one of them says that a museum is a monumental space with the comfortability of the domestic space. And I think, we missed that, totally the point, with modernism. And we need to get back to a kindness where people just can be, as you say, and then let's see, what they get, what they want to use the museum for. But I think this democratic space, I was remembering this a lot with the exhibition of Tillmans in the Pompidou, remembering this open, free library space as a cultural space, and there is something there that we just had missed totally, and the Pompidou itself had missed, in the sense of the rest of the building, not the library itself. And I think, this model of the 70s, we need to rethink a lot these huge institutions as ours in that same, and I think, for example, thinking about Madrid, how the productive space of culture is the night. So how we can produce the relationality of the night in a daytime museum, cultural space, precisely to get a kind of a mood where the people can really share different kind of things, social relations,
It's always great coming to Madrid because most of the museums are open till 9 o'clock in the evening. I would absolutely wish for that in Germany as well. But maybe that brings me to a point which we often don't discuss, but let's talk a bit about money. Because being open as a church or being open as a domestic space I'm invited to, there's no cashier at the front desk. And always when I'm in the UK, the museums are different in that way because people are walking in and out and it starts to rain and the museum is a dry place suddenly because nobody has to pay, nobody has to... and some museums have become, for my students, when I talk to them, they say, I can't afford it several times a week. How do you deal with that question?
It's very difficult, but the difference between the church and the museum is that the church is really rich, and the museums are not rich. the people pay taxes for the church and not particular taxes for museums. Yeah.
But our institutions are paid by taxes as well.
Yeah, but yeah, that's true. That's very true, and that's very important to understand. But it's not a particular museum tax, it's the general tax from where it's taken.
In Sweden, we have switched between free entrance and paid entrance, depending on which government. And right now, our government took away money, so we have to have visitors to pay. But so it's a very political and loaded questions, at least in our country. But actually, our investigation shows that actually money is not the biggest threshold to enter a museum. And we can see it from our number of visitors. It's not that big change whether people have to pay or not. So it's more an ideological discussion. What we do on a practical daily basis is that every Friday night is free. From 6 to 8, it's free. And it's, right now it's kind of, it evolved into a like party night. There's music, thousands of young people coming. So we also use that as a special occasion to have a different museum experience, as you talked about. Yeah.
We have a really, really special circumstance because really our museum is free every day, 2 hours a day, from 7 to 9 every day. And Sundays that we don't open, the last 2 hours of Sunday is from 12:30 to 2:30 is also for free. And also, this is the the headquarters of the museum, but the pavilions in the park, the Crystal Palace and the Velázquez Palace are for free forever. So this is why they got this incredible number of visitors, because always, if you want to go to the central space, you need to have the will to go to a museum. But in a park, you're just walking around in the park and you fall down an exhibition, you know what I mean? Like it's totally different sensation. There are more democratic spaces, so this is the difference. But it's true that at the same time, as a state, I guess it's the same for you, that as a public institution, the quantity of reductions that we have for every kind of persons are incredible. So, it's not the main money that enters the account of the museum is not just for tickets, So, it's of course, it's meaningful, but it's not the main revenue.
But we do have also times where the entrance is free. And we find sponsors. We just found a new sponsor who offered a Friday afternoon free, right? It's fantastic. It's really fantastic. But it would be, of course, the most beautiful thing that at least the collection is free, like the whole day. Maybe we reach that one day. I will ask Julia. She's responsible for the
because
money
that's
issue.
also that not just brings me the idea with who is allowed to enter, but it's also the idea of the collection is ours, and it's not the collection of the museum. The collection is ours, and I think that was in the Nordrhein-Westfalen history. The state wanted to found something for the state.
This is a good argument. I will go again to the cultural minister and tell her that.
Maybe I have one question specific for Susanne, because I've found it interesting. The Reina Sofia and the Modern, they have both the term museum in their name, but the Kunstsammlung NRW, for a long time, there was no term museum in there, and in your new collection title, you're using the term museum. What does it mean for you, because labeled museum is something we go back in that long history, and I asked myself if the naming of Schmalenbach or the early founders with just the title Kunstsammlung had something different in mind? Maybe not.
It's for us, it's really difficult to have this long, complicated name, especially the North Rhine-Westphalia edition. If you go to another country and you say, I'm the director of the Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Westfalen, they think you come from a very tiny village somewhere with a very Yeah, it's difficult, but Armin Zweite and his team was so clever to invent the K20 and K21. This is, I think, one of the best ideas in the history of this museum. This is why we really also went back to that. What means K20? What means K21? Because for a while it was not so specific. Now it's very specific again. K20 is for modern and post-war art, and K21 is for contemporary art from the 21st century. And we, I think, did not find any solution to, changing the name is not an option. Letting away North Rhine-Westphalia is also not an option. All of a sudden, changing the whole, this is not, we have to live with this name, and our luck is that we can simplify through K20 and K21. And meanwhile, this is also, but we don't have the museum. Yeah, it's true. It's
maybe, but maybe that helps you as well, because the museum brings you is always this very
Albatross of the past.
And I had also one question coming from Gitte. You said that I found very interesting. My experience as well during the pandemic years. Suddenly, many museums on the whole world start to dive in what you said, dive in our storages, because suddenly we weren't able to travel, and our works weren't able to travel, and the costs were suddenly outrageous. These museums started to work more and more with their collections, and I thought, let's see what happens after the pandemics. And in some museums it stayed, they worked more with their collections. Many museums just went back to the old models of international loan systems. How do you deal with that? Or no?
Well, we deal with it with the chapters we are doing, but actually in 2022 we made an experiment with our timber exhibitions and stating that we didn't want to transport artworks for a whole year. So our whole program was made out of exhibitions that with no transported loans. And one of the exhibitions that we made in that period was the large Nan Goldin retrospective, where Nan Goldin for the first time is shown only with no framed works. And actually the exhibition is now touring. It was at the Stedelijk, Neue Nationalgalerie, going to Hangar Bekok and Grand Palais and forwards. So that ended up being an extremely generous way of, it's very easy to tour that exhibition because we don't have any works there. You see 2,000 works by Nan Goldin, but they are all on filmed image. So that learned us, the pandemic learned us new way of thinking. And for us, this was also to think into really a radical future, because we are staging a Picasso show this fall. And I don't think we can do that in 30 years. I don't think we are able to actually ship from all over the world together works for exhibition. So how do we think that? So I think the pandemic made us think about many things. And I think, and I also think one important learning is that we in Sweden, we had an increasing number of local visitors. During the pandemic, we were slightly open a little bit. So it learned us to have more focus actually on our local community. And I think that's a good thing, because we are situated in a special space and we need to encourage and embrace that.
I'm looking on. Yeah, thank you so much at that point. Vivian gave me a short remark because we have to stay in our schedule today, and sometimes it's the unfortunate role that somebody has to be the timekeeper. Now I'm the one. Thank you very much. We are gonna have another panel this afternoon, and after the second panel, we are gonna open the stage into a big discussion. So we are switching to the next panel, Or, thank you.